Black CEO uncovers family secret that shatters his business empire. The sound of breaking glass pierced the air as Marcus Reynolds slammed his fist onto his mahogany desk, sending his award for Business Leader of the Year crashing to the floor. His normally composed demeanor had crumbled, replaced by a storm of rage and disbelief. Tears streamed down his face as he stared at the yellowed newspaper clipping in his trembling hands. "How could you do this?" Marcus whispered, his voice breaking. "Everything I've built, everything I believed." The door to his executive office burst open. His daughter Amara rushed in, her eyes wide with concern. "Dad, what's happening? The board members are all waiting downstairs, and I could hear you from the hallway." Marcus looked up at her, his face a mask of anguish. "It's all been a lie, Amara. Reynolds Enterprises, our family legacy, everything." He held up an old photograph that had been paperclipped to the newspaper article. It showed a young black man in handcuffs being led away by police officers, his face bearing an unmistakable resemblance to Marcus himself. "This man isn't just some criminal from the past," Marcus said, his voice hollow. "This is my father, and the factory that became the cornerstone of our business empire. He didn't build it. He was framed for trying to burn it down during the riots of '68. Amara's hand flew to her mouth. "But Grandpa James always said, James Reynolds wasn't my father," Marcus cut in, his voice hardening. "He was the man who testified against my real father and then somehow ended up with his property. And now, after 40 years, I have to go downstairs and announce to the board that Reynolds Enterprises was built on a theft from my own flesh and blood." The phone on Marcus's desk began to ring insistently. The caller ID showed it was Walter Kensington, the company's largest investor. "What are you going to do?" Amara asked, her voice barely audible above the ringing. Marcus straightened his tie, wiped his eyes, and took a deep breath. "I'm going to tell the truth, even if it costs me everything." But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when Marcus Reynolds was having the best day of his already impressive life. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Reynolds Enterprises headquarters in downtown Chicago. Marcus Reynolds stood at the window of his corner office, surveying the city below. At 62, he still cut an impressive figure, tall and distinguished with closely cropped salt-and-pepper hair and the confident posture of a man who had spent decades commanding respect. Today was a milestone. Reynolds Medical Technologies, the healthcare division of his company, had just received FDA approval for a groundbreaking portable dialysis device that would revolutionize kidney care in underserved communities. It was the culmination of a 5-year passion project, one that perfectly aligned with his company's mission: innovative solutions for everyday problems. Marcus turned as his assistant, Diane, knocked on his open door. She'd been with him for 25 years, since Reynolds Enterprises was operating out of a converted warehouse. "Your daughter's on line 1, Diane said with a smile. "And may I say congratulations again, sir. Your father would have been so proud of what you've accomplished with the company he started." Marcus nodded appreciatively. "Thank you, Diane. James Reynolds built the foundation. I'm just expanding on his vision." He picked up the phone. "Amara, I was just about to call you with the good news." "Already saw it online, Dad," his daughter replied, her voice warm with pride. "The stock is already up 12% this morning. The board must be doing cartwheels." Marcus chuckled. "Most of them are a bit too old for gymnastics, but yes, there's a lot of happy people in the building today." "Listen," Amara continued, "I know you've got the board meeting this afternoon, but I was hoping to stop by beforehand. I have something important to share." "Everything okay?" Marcus asked, immediately concerned. Despite running a billion-dollar company, his daughter had always been his priority. "Everything's great, Dad. Just want to talk in person. See you around noon." After hanging up, Marcus walked to the small table in the corner of his office where he kept family photos. He picked up one of himself as a young man standing beside James Reynolds, the man who had raised him, taught him business, and entrusted him with Reynolds Enterprises when he retired in 1995. James had been gone for 15 years now, but Marcus still found himself wondering what his father would think of his decisions. "The Reynolds legacy continues," Marcus said softly to the photograph. "Just like you wanted." By 11:30, Marcus had been through 3 meetings and was reviewing the quarterly projections with his CFO, Benjamin Howard, a meticulous man in his 50s who had been with the company for nearly 2 decades. "The medical division is going to exceed all expectations this quarter," Benjamin said, sliding a folder across the desk. "But I'm concerned about the consumer electronics division. The new smart home system is behind schedule." Marcus nodded. "I spoke with the development team yesterday. They need another 8 weeks, but the product will be worth the wait. Benjamin hesitated. Walter Kensington has been asking questions about the delay. You know how impatient he can be. Marcus sighed. Walter Kensington was their largest outside investor, a venture capitalist with deep pockets and little patience. At 70, he was old school in the worst ways, abrasive, demanding, and not always subtle about his discomfort with taking direction from a black CEO, even one with Marcus's track record. I'll address his concerns at the board meeting, Marcus assured Benjamin. Reynolds Enterprises didn't get where it is by rushing products to market before they're ready. The intercom buzzed. Ms. Reynolds is here to see you, Diane announced. Amara Reynolds entered the office with the confident stride she'd inherited from her father. At 38, she was the company's legal director, having worked her way up despite whispers of nepotism when she first joined. Her legal acumen had silenced those whispers years ago. There's my girl, Marcus said warmly, rising to embrace his daughter. Big day, Dad, Amara replied, hugging him tightly. The dialysis device approval is all over the business news. After Benjamin excused himself, Amara took a seat across from her father. So I have some news, she began, her expression a mix of excitement and nervousness. I've been offered a position with the Justice Department, Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois. Marcus's eyebrows shot up. Amara, that's incredible. It would mean leaving Reynolds, obviously, she continued. I wanted to talk to you before making my decision. Marcus leaned back, studying his daughter's face. You know, when your mother was still with us, she always said you had a fire in you for justice that went beyond corporate law. He smiled at the memory of his late wife, Patricia, who had passed away from breast cancer 10 years earlier. She'd be thrilled about this opportunity. You're not disappointed? Amara asked. I know you always hoped I might take over the company someday. Marcus shook his head. Reynolds Enterprises will be here if and when you want it. But this is a chance to make a different kind of impact. Your grandfather James always said business should serve a purpose beyond profit. Sounds like you found your purpose. Amara smiled, relieved. Thanks, Dad. There's one more thing. My first assignment would be working with a special task force investigating historical property theft during the civil rights era. Cases where black business owners were forced out or framed for crimes so others could take their properties. Important work, Marcus nodded. Sadly, there were too many cases like that. The thing is, Amara continued, part of their focus is on Chicago's South Side manufacturing district in the late 1960s, where Grandpa James started Reynolds Manufacturing. Marcus waved dismissively. Your grandfather purchased that factory fair and square in 1968. He showed me the paperwork when I was younger. He was very proud of doing everything by the book, but I understand the importance of the work you'd be doing. Amara seemed about to say something else when Marcus's phone rang. It's Walter Kensington, Diane announced through the intercom. Marcus sighed. I should take this. We'll continue our conversation later. Amara nodded and stood to leave. At the door, she paused. Dad, one more thing. There's a historian who's been helping the task force. He came across some old newspaper articles about the South Side factory and asked if he could speak with you. Man named Dr. Ellis Thompson from Chicago State. Have him call my office to set up a time. Marcus replied, already reaching for the phone to speak with Kensington. Actually, he's downstairs in the lobby now, Amara said hesitantly. I told him you were busy, but he was very insistent about seeing you today. Marcus frowned at the interruption to his schedule, but nodded. Tell Diane to send him up after I finish with Kensington. 15 minutes, no more. After a tense conversation with Walter Kensington about the delayed product launch, Marcus checked his watch. The board meeting was at 2 o'clock, giving him just enough time to briefly meet with this historian before his lunch. Dr. Ellis Thompson was not what Marcus expected. Rather than the elderly academic he had imagined, Thompson was a man in his early 40s with keen eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He carried a worn leather messenger bag and had the energy of someone who spent more time in archives than classrooms. Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Reynolds, Thompson said, shaking Marcus's hand firmly. I've been studying the economic impact of the 1968 riots on Chicago's black business community for the past 5 years. Fascinating, I'm sure, Marcus replied, gesturing to a chair while glancing at his watch. I'm afraid I only have a few minutes before my next appointment. Thompson nodded, quickly removing several folders from his bag. I'll be direct then. I'm particularly interested in the history of the building that became the first Reynolds manufacturing plant, the property at 4738 South Ashland Avenue. My father purchased that building in 1968, Marcus said, a note of pride in his voice. Started with 12 employees making electrical components. Built it into a company that now employs over 5,000 people. Yes, James Reynolds officially acquired the property in August 1968, Thompson confirmed, opening one of his folders. But my research has uncovered some discrepancies in the official record. Marcus's expression hardened slightly. What kind of discrepancies? Thompson pulled out a black and white photograph. This is the original owner of that factory. His name was William Porter. He operated Porter Electronics from 1962 until April 1968. Marcus took the photograph, studying the image of a young black man standing proudly in front of a modest industrial building. The sign above the door clearly read Porter Electronics. "I've never heard of him," Marcus said, returning the photograph. Thompson nodded. "Few people have. You see, during the riots that followed Dr. King's assassination, many black-owned businesses were destroyed. But Porter Electronics survived the unrest largely intact. Yet somehow, 3 weeks later, William Porter was arrested for allegedly attempting to burn down his own building for insurance money." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "And you're suggesting this arrest was suspicious? The evidence was flimsy at best," Thompson continued, pulling out newspaper clippings. "One witness claimed to have seen Porter near the building with gasoline cans. Porter insisted he was trying to protect his business from rioters. He was convicted largely on the testimony of that single witness." "And that witness was?" Marcus asked, though something in his expression suggested he already suspected the answer. "James Reynolds," Thompson said quietly, sliding a yellowed newspaper clipping across the desk. "Who then purchased the building at auction for a fraction of its value while Porter was serving a 5-year sentence at Stateville Correctional Center." Marcus stared at the newspaper article, which showed a much younger James Reynolds testifying in court. The headline read, "Local man testifies against arsonist, later purchases damaged property." "This is quite an accusation you're making," Marcus said, his voice carefully controlled. "James Reynolds was a respected businessman who built a company that has provided jobs and opportunities for thousands of people over 5 decades. Thompson raised his hand slightly. "I'm not making accusations, Mr. Reynolds. I'm following historical records, but there's more to this story." He hesitated, then continued. "William Porter had a wife and a young son when he was sent to prison. The wife died of pneumonia while Porter was incarcerated. The son was placed in foster care." "What happened to Porter after he was released?" Marcus asked, a strange tension now evident in his voice. "Tried to challenge the property transfer, but had no resources for a proper legal fight. He worked odd jobs, tried to reconnect with his son, but struggled with depression. He died in 1983 suicide, according to the death certificate." Marcus stood abruptly. "Dr. Thompson, while I appreciate historical research, I fail to see how events from over 50 years ago are relevant to Reynolds Enterprises today. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a board meeting to prepare for." Thompson began gathering his materials, but paused to pull one last document from his bag. "Mr. Reynolds, there's one more thing you should see." He placed a birth certificate on the desk. "This is William Porter's son's birth certificate." Marcus glanced at it impatiently, then froze. The certificate showed a baby boy born to William Porter and Evelyn Porter on September 12, 1962. The child's name was listed as Marcus William Porter. "This," Marcus whispered, all color draining from his face. "This can't be right." "There's also this," Thompson said gently, placing a faded color photograph beside the birth certificate. It showed William Porter holding a small boy of about 4, the child's features unmistakably similar to Marcus's own childhood photos that sat on his office credenza. "James and Ruth Reynolds adopted you in 1969, while your biological father was in prison," Thompson explained softly. "The adoption records were sealed, which was common practice then. I don't believe you were ever told about your true parentage." Marcus sank back into his chair, his mind reeling. "James always told me my parents died in a car accident," he said, his voice barely audible. "He said they were friends of his, that they asked him to take care of me if anything happened to them." "I believe James Reynolds convinced himself he was saving you from a difficult life as the son of a convicted felon," Thompson suggested. "Perhaps in his mind, giving you his name and eventually his company was a form of atonement." Marcus stared at the photograph of himself with his biological father, memories flashing through his mind, subtle tensions when he'd asked about his parents, conversations that abruptly changed direction, old family friends who sometimes looked at him strangely. "Why are you bringing this to me now?" Marcus asked, his voice hollow. "The Justice Department's task force is reopening cases like your father's William Porter's," Thompson clarified. There were dozens of similar situations during that period where black business owners lost everything through suspicious criminal charges. I thought you deserved to know the truth before it becomes public record. After Thompson left, Marcus sat motionless at his desk, surrounded by the evidence of his true origins. The man he had revered his entire life, the man whose business principles had guided his every decision, had testified falsely against his biological father and then built an empire on the stolen foundation. With trembling hands, Marcus picked up his phone and called Amara. When she answered, he could barely form the words, "I need you in my office. Now." When Amara arrived, Marcus wordlessly handed her the documents Thompson had left. She read through them slowly, her legal training evident in her methodical review of the evidence. "Dad," she finally said, looking up with tears in her eyes, "I had no idea. When the task force mentioned the South Side cases, I never imagined. That your grandfather was a thief, that I'm not even a Reynolds," Marcus said bitterly. "That our entire family legacy is built on a lie. What are you going to do?" Amara asked. Marcus glanced at the clock 1 hour until the board meeting where he was supposed to announce the FDA approval and their expansion plans. Walter Kensington and the other board members would be expecting a triumph, not a devastating revelation about the company's origins. "I need to confirm all of this," Marcus said, his business instincts asserting themselves despite his emotional turmoil. "I won't destroy everything we've built based on one historian's research." He picked up the phone and called Benjamin Howard, his CFO. "Benjamin, I need you to clear your schedule. Meet me in the archives room in 5 minutes, and I need our most discreet private investigator on standby." In the basement of Reynolds Enterprises headquarters was a climate-controlled room that housed the company's historical records. Few people even knew of its existence. Marcus had always taken pride in preserving the company's history. James had instilled in him the importance of remembering where they came from. Now that same room might hold evidence of the terrible truth. Benjamin was already waiting when Marcus and Amara arrived. "Sir, is everything all right?" he asked, noting Marcus's uncharacteristically disturbed expression. "I need to see all the original property records for the South Ashland factory," Marcus said, ignoring the question. "And any personal papers of James Reynolds from the late 1960s. The three of them spent the next 45 minutes searching through meticulously organized files. Benjamin found the property deed showing James Reynolds's purchase of the building at 4738 South Ashland for a remarkably low price. Amara discovered insurance documents that valued the property at nearly 10 times what James had paid. But it was Marcus who made the most damning discovery, a small lockbox hidden behind a row of financial ledgers. Inside was a journal written in James's distinctive handwriting, detailing his opportunity to acquire the Porter-Electronics factory. The final entry made Marcus's blood run cold. "Testified against Porter today. Felt sick doing it, but the opportunity is too great to pass up. The boy looks like him. Will that be a problem later? Ruth says no one will know if we move to the north side after the adoption is finalized. Porter Electronics will become Reynolds Manufacturing, and no one will remember William Porter in a few years. I'll make it up to the boy by giving him every opportunity. Someday he'll thank me." Marcus slammed the journal shut, a wave of nausea washing over him. "It's all true," he whispered. Benjamin, who had been watching with growing concern, finally spoke up. "I don't know what's happening, but the board meeting starts in 10 minutes. Marcus stood up straight, decision crystallizing in his mind. "Benjamin, I need you to do something for me. Go to the boardroom and tell them I'll be 15 minutes late, then call our legal team and have them prepare for a major announcement." After Benjamin left, Amara touched her father's arm. "Dad, what are you planning to do?" "The only thing I can do," Marcus replied. "Tell the truth, return what was stolen." "But Dad, that could mean losing control of the company. The shareholders could revolt. Everything you've built, everything I've built was on a foundation of lies," Marcus cut in, his voice firm. "I thought I was continuing the Reynolds legacy. Instead, I've been unknowingly profiting from the destruction of my own father's dream." "You've created thousands of jobs," Amara argued. "The medical division alone has saved countless lives. That wasn't James, that was all you." Marcus picked up the photograph of himself with William Porter. "And what might my real father have built if he'd been given the chance?" he asked softly. "What might Porter Electronics have become?" Before Amara could respond, Marcus's cell phone rang. It was the private investigator he had contacted earlier. "Mr. Reynolds, I found someone you might want to talk to," the investigator said. "William Porter had a cellmate at Stateville, man named Harold Jackson. He's 84 now, living in a nursing home in Evanston. Says Porter told him everything. Marcus checked his watch. The board was waiting, but this couldn't wait. Text me the address. I'm on my way. Lakeside Care Center was a modest but clean facility overlooking Lake Michigan. Harold Jackson sat in a wheelchair by the window, his thin frame belying the sharp intelligence in his eyes. "You look just like him," were Jackson's first words when Marcus entered the room. "William used to show me your picture every chance he got. Said his boy was going to be somebody important someday." Marcus sank into the chair beside Jackson, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Tell me about him, please." Jackson's weathered face softened with memory. "William Porter was the smartest man I ever met, could fix anything with wires in it. Started that electronics shop with a loan from his uncle and built it into something special. Had contracts with some big companies before everything went to hell. And the fire, the one he was accused of setting," Jackson shook his head emphatically. "There was a fire all right, but William was trying to put it out, not start it. Some folks had broken in during the riots, but most of the damage was minor. William was there day and night protecting the place. And James Reynolds? That man," Jackson spat, his gentle demeanor briefly hardening, "had been trying to buy the building for months. William wouldn't sell, said it was his son's inheritance. After the riots, Reynolds saw his chance. Told the police he saw William with gasoline cans. It was a lie, but in 1968, who was going to believe a black business owner over a white man with connections?" Marcus absorbed this, each word like a physical blow. "What happened to my mother? To Evelyn?" Sadness clouded Jackson's face. "She tried to hold things together while William was inside. Worked 2 jobs, tried to find a lawyer who would take the case. The pneumonia took her fast, she was gone within a week of falling ill. William found out in prison, nearly destroyed him. And me, what happened to me? State took you foster care. William tried to find you when he got out in '73, but the records were sealed. By then you were already Marcus Reynolds. He spent years searching, but with no money and no resources." Jackson trailed off. "Did he ever stop looking for me?" Marcus asked, his voice breaking. Jackson reached for a small box beside his chair. "He never stopped. When he died, the only things he had of value were these. He asked me to keep them in case his son ever came looking." Inside the box was a small collection of treasures, a child's drawing signed Marcus, a tiny handprint in plaster, and a folded letter addressed simply to my son. With trembling hands, Marcus opened the letter and read the words his biological father had written decades earlier. "My dearest Marcus, if you are reading this, then you have finally learned the truth, and I am no longer here to tell you myself. I want you to know that not a day passed that I didn't think of you and your mother. What was taken from us cannot be returned, but I hope you have found happiness and purpose in your life. Know that you were loved completely and without condition from the moment you came into this world. Whatever you have become, wherever life has taken you, I am proud of you. Your father, William Porter." Tears streamed down Marcus's face as decades of unknowing loss caught up with him in an instant. Harold Jackson sat quietly, allowing him this moment of grief and connection. Finally, Marcus looked up. "Thank you for keeping these safe, for keeping his memory alive." Jackson nodded. William would be glad to know his boy found his way back even after all this time. As Marcus stood to leave, Jackson called after him. "What will you do now that you know?" Marcus turned back, his expression resolute despite the tears still on his cheeks. "Honor his memory and make things right." When Marcus returned to Reynolds Enterprises, the board meeting had been delayed for over an hour. Walter Kensington was pacing the executive floor, his face flushed with irritation. Benjamin and Amara had managed to keep the other board members occupied, but Kensington had refused to be placated. "Reynolds," Kensington called out as Marcus stepped off the elevator. "What the hell is going on? We have an FDA approval to celebrate, expansion plans to approve, and you disappear without explanation." Marcus walked past him without slowing. "The meeting will start in 5 minutes, Walter. I suggest you take your seat." His office, Marcus found Amara waiting, concern etched on her face. "Dad, the legal team is here as you requested, but they're asking what kind of announcement you're planning." "I'll tell them myself," Marcus replied, straightening his tie and gathering the documents that told the true story of Reynolds Enterprises. It was this moment standing in his office with the evidence of his shattered identity spread before him that had triggered the crisis Amara had witnessed earlier. Now, back to where we started. Marcus Reynolds stood before the Reynolds Enterprises Board of Directors, the weight of history heavy on his shoulders. The 14 men and women seated around the polished conference table represented over $2 billion in investment. They had expected to hear about the FDA approval of the dialysis device. Instead, they were about to learn that their company was built on theft and false testimony. "Before we discuss today's FDA announcement," Marcus began, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil. "There's something more pressing I need to address." He placed the documents on the table, the newspaper clippings, the court records, James Reynolds' journal, and William Porter's birth certificate. As Marcus explained what he had discovered, the room grew increasingly tense. Walter Kensington's face darkened with each revelation. "Let me understand this," Kensington interrupted. "You're telling us that James Reynolds, the founder of this company, falsely testified against your biological father and then essentially stole his business?" "Yes," Marcus answered simply. "And you're bringing this up now, 57 years later, on the day we should be celebrating a major corporate achievement," Kensington continued, his voice rising. "What exactly do you expect us to do with this information, Reynolds?" Marcus met his gaze unflinchingly. "I expect you to support me in making this right. I'm establishing a foundation in William Porter's name to provide funding for black entrepreneurs. I'm allocating $50 million of company funds as initial capital." Murmurs spread around the table. Kensington slammed his hand down. "That's shareholder money you're talking about. You can't just—" "I can and I will," Marcus cut in. "Furthermore, I'm announcing a full investigation into the origins of Reynolds Enterprises to be conducted by an independent ethics committee. If other properties or assets were acquired through similar means, restitution will be made." "This is corporate suicide," Kensington sputtered. "The stock will plummet. We could face lawsuits from investors." "Perhaps," Marcus acknowledged. "But it's the right thing to do." Kensington stood, his face contorted with rage. "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence. Reynolds has clearly lost his mind and is no longer fit to lead this company." Several board members shifted uncomfortably, but none immediately supported Kensington's motion. Sharon Williams, the longest-serving board member besides Marcus, finally spoke up. "Walter, let's take a moment here. Marcus has led this company to record profits for 15 consecutive quarters. The medical division he championed has just received FDA approval for a device that will change lives. Perhaps we should hear his full plan before making rash decisions." Marcus nodded gratefully to Sharon before continuing. "I'm not suggesting we dismantle Reynolds Enterprises. The company employs thousands of people and provides valuable products and services. But we need to acknowledge our true origins and make amends where possible." He turned to Amara, who stood near the door. "My daughter has been offered a position with the Justice Department, working on a task force investigating historical property theft during the civil rights era. I've asked her to delay accepting that position for 6 months to help lead our internal investigation first." Amara stepped forward. "What my father is proposing isn't just morally right, it's also smart business. Companies that proactively address historical wrongs fare better than those that fight against the truth when it eventually comes to light. And it always does come to light." For the next hour, Marcus outlined his full plan, a combination of restitution, community investment, and corporate restructuring that would acknowledge the company's problematic origins while preserving its positive contributions and future potential. By the end, most of the board members were cautiously supportive. Walter Kensington remained the primary holdout. "This is emotional decision-making, not business," Kensington insisted. "You're allowing a personal discovery to cloud your judgment." Marcus smiled for the first time since making his discovery. "Actually, Walter, I'm allowing a personal discovery to clear my judgment. For years, I've run this company according to principles I thought James Reynolds exemplified: integrity, innovation, community investment. Now I realize those weren't his principles at all. They were mine." He gestured to the FDA approval documents that had been overshadowed by the day's revelations. "This dialysis device that received approval today, James Reynolds would never have greenlit that project. The return on investment is too slow, the market too limited, but I pushed for it because it was the right thing to do." Marcus stood taller, a new conviction in his voice. "I'm not James Reynolds' son. I'm William Porter's son. And it's time for Reynolds Enterprises to reflect the values of the man who should have been its founder." The vote, when it came, was 11-3 in favor of Marcus's plan, with Kensington and 2 of his allies opposed. As the meeting adjourned, Kensington approached Marcus. "This isn't over, Reynolds," he said quietly. "When the stock takes a hit, the shareholders will demand blood, and I'll be happy to give them yours." Marcus nodded calmly. "You're welcome to try, Walter. But I should warn you, I'm not the man I was this morning. For the first time in my life, I know exactly who I am and what I stand for. That makes me more dangerous, not less." 6 months later, Marcus stood at a podium in the south side of Chicago, not far from where Porter Electronics had once stood. Behind him was a new six-story building with the William Porter Center for Innovation emblazoned across its facade. Before him sat hundreds of community members, business leaders, and media representatives. "Today," Marcus began, "we open not just a building, but a pathway to opportunity. This center will provide workspace, funding, mentorship, and resources to entrepreneurs from historically marginalized communities. It is named for a man who never got to fulfill his own business dreams, my father, William Porter." The crowd applauded as Marcus gestured to the elderly man in a wheelchair beside him. "I want to thank Harold Jackson, who kept my father's memory alive, and who will serve as an advisor to our first cohort of entrepreneurs." Harold Jackson smiled and waved, pride evident in his weathered face. "I also want to acknowledge Dr. Ellis Thompson, whose research brought the truth to light. His new position as the center's historian ensures that we never forget the past as we build the future." Thompson nodded from his seat in the front row. "Many of you know that the past 6 months have been challenging for Reynolds Enterprises," Marcus continued. "Our stock initially fell 20% when we announced our investigation and restitution plan. Some major investors withdrew their support." His gaze found Walter Kensington, who sat stiffly in the back row. After failing to oust Marcus, Kensington had sold his shares in Reynolds Enterprises shares that were now rebounding as the company's ethical stance attracted a new generation of socially conscious investors. "But something remarkable happened," Marcus went on. "As we acknowledged our complicated origins and committed to making amends, new doors opened. Our transparency attracted partners who share our values. The publicity surrounding our story brought attention to our products, particularly our medical division, which has seen orders increase by 40%. Marcus turned to Amara, who stood nearby. "My daughter recently accepted that position with the Justice Department, heading up the task force on historical property theft. I couldn't be prouder of her commitment to ensuring that what happened to William Porter doesn't remain buried in history." Amara smiled, tears in her eyes. "Some have asked if I regret learning the truth," Marcus said, his voice growing more personal. "If I wish I could go back to before I knew that James Reynolds, the man I thought was my father, had built his success on another man's downfall. The answer is no. The truth, however painful, has set me free in ways I never expected." He held up the child's drawing that had been in William Porter's keepsakes, his own small handprint from a time before his world changed. "In finding my true father, I also found my true self. William Porter never got to build his business empire, but through his son, his values of integrity, perseverance, and community will now shape the future of the company that bears his spirit, if not his name." As the crowd rose in a standing ovation, Marcus felt a sense of peace that had eluded him his entire life. The company he had inherited was forever changed. The legacy he would leave was now truly his own. And somewhere he believed William Porter was finally proud of what his son had become. If you're enjoying this story, please consider subscribing to hear more stories like this. 1 year later, Marcus sat in his office, reviewing the quarterly reports. Reynolds Enterprises, which he had convinced the board to rename Porter-Reynolds Enterprises, was thriving under its new mission. The medical division continued to expand, while the consumer electronics division had refocused on affordable technology for underserved markets. The William Porter Center had already launched 28 new businesses, creating over 300 jobs in the community. And the investigation into historical property theft had resulted in 5 more cases of restitution to families who had lost businesses during the civil rights era. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Benjamin Howard entered, carrying a small package. "This came for you," Benjamin said, placing it on the desk. "From Harold Jackson's family." Marcus opened the package to find a worn leather wallet. Inside was a faded photograph of William Porter standing in front of Porter Electronics on its opening day in 1962, his face beaming with pride and possibility. A note accompanied the wallet. "Harold passed peacefully last night. His last wish was for you to have this. Your father carried it every day. He said it belonged with you now." Marcus ran his fingers over the weathered leather, imagining his father's hands doing the same decades earlier. For so long, he had defined himself as James Reynolds' son and heir. Now he understood that he was William Porter's legacy, not just in blood, but in spirit. He placed the wallet carefully beside the photograph of his biological father on his desk, the past and present finally aligned. There was another knock at his door, and Amara entered. "Dad, the Justice Department is announcing 5 new investigations today based on our findings. Thought you'd want to know." Marcus smiled. Your mother would be so proud of the work you're doing. I know I am. Amara came around the desk and hugged him. I learned from the best. A man who had the courage to face the truth, no matter how difficult. As Amara left for her press conference, Marcus turned to the window, gazing out at the Chicago skyline. So much had changed in the past year. The company he had thought would be his life's only legacy was now just one part of a much richer story. He had lost the false certainty of who he was, but gained something far more valuable, the truth of his origins and the freedom to honor both what might have been and what still could be. In the reflection of the window, Marcus could almost see two figures standing behind him, James Reynolds, the man who raised him, flawed and human in his ambition, and William Porter, the father he never knew, whose dream had finally found its fulfillment. The past doesn't define us, Marcus whispered to himself, words he now used to begin every speech he gave. But how we face the truth of that past determines who we become. Outside his window, the city continued its endless rhythm, lives intersecting in ways both seen and unseen, the past flowing into the present, and the present laying foundations for a future where old wrongs might finally be made right. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.